busy chatting away.
There we go. We're good.
Okay, I want to call this meeting to order. Newcastle Planning Committee, let me start with roll call. David, would you mind?
Yes, ma'am. David Majewski.
Ray Rivera. Margot Rain.
Kristen Zumar, Darren Stoner.
Stephen Franklin.
Thank you. We have a quorum. So our first order of business is approval of the minutes from 10:14. There's actually two sets of minutes to be approved. The first set of minutes is for the, what's this planning commission minutes? It wasn't really the planning commission. It was
There's the public hearing.
public hearing. So I think that needs to be corrected. So that first one should be public hearing?
It should probably say planning commission, public hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it says I called it does say I called the public hearing to order. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes other than at the top saying public hearing? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Free, I'll motion to approve.
Do I have a second? Kristen, I second. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. And then the second set of minutes is from the actual meeting. I'm unaware of anything. Does anybody else have any other corrections or changes? Do I have a motion to approve?
Kristen, I motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Free, I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. I think how there's nobody here to make public comments. Presentation, welcome. Who's our guest?
Yes. Members of the planning commission, this is Amy Mendelson from our Millsboro office.
Oh, you came up a ways, thank you.
Yeah. She's a certified planner from our Millsboro office. Just want to tell them some of the towns and the things that you do down there or for us.
Yeah, so I work closely with Sussex County Planning and Zoning and with their building permit department. And we work with Millsboro, Dagsboro, Frankfurt. In the past year, we started working with Hemlock and Acres, which is right here in the Rehoboth area. We've worked with Fenwick Island. We currently work with Ocean View, kind of more on the eastern side of the county. Primarily land use planning projects and assisting towns, kind of like what Chris does, assisting towns with their kind of day-to-day planning activities.
So I asked Amy to put this together. We had just worked on a similar project in one of our municipalities in Maryland on accessory dwelling units. So some of these issues were fresh on our mind. So I asked Amy to put this presentation together and we'll go through it.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, this goes back several months when the planning commission was, it started probably before the State Department of State Housing, Karen Horton came and gave a presentation. But I think that her presentation definitely piqued our interest, and members of the planning commission had been asking for more information on, the implications of an ADU and what are the things that we need to consider. How would they work? And that's what this presentation is going to go over.
All right. Should I present from here?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, just let me know when you're like, paragraph.
all right. So like Chris said, this is just kind of going over the basics of an ADU and the different considerations for an ADU.
Sorry, give me one sec.
And the tutorial on emails.
Yeah. Just gonna have to do it this way because it acts funny on this computer. I'm sorry.
That works. And I think everybody has the presentation also in front of
Yes.
them. So starting with, what is an ADU? That first definition is from the American Planning Association. So this is kind of the most simplistic definition as a smaller independent residential dwelling unit located on the same lot as a standalone single-family home. So that's just kind of like the basics of what an ADU is. I'm not gonna read through for word all these other definitions, but some of these, you can tell that they go into a bit more depth of what an ADU is. So some of these examples, you'll see the phrasing customarily incidental and subordinate to the principal use. That's a pretty common phrase, and that's actually a phrase that's used in your current definition for accessory uses and structures. They also use language like provides complete independent living and defines that as having cooking, sleeping, and sanitation facilities. So that's another thing that you commonly see in a definition. And then the type of ADU, which we'll get into in a later slide. That third definition that you see from Milford, they basically define it as an accessory apartment or a cottage. So the apartment being within an existing structure, whereas the accessory cottage is a detached building. And in that last definition, again, you see similar language like independent living facility, and then instead of that subordinate to the principal use, they list in that last sentence clearly accessory to the use of the main or principal dwelling. So you can kind of see like common themes of language that you use throughout a definition to add a little bit more to it than just that first definition. Next slide, please.
So Lewis just adopted an ADU ordinance, I mean, within the last 7 months.
Yeah.
And I think that was for something else. So
What, is it the same reason that we're kind of bringing it up that other municipalities are adopting it? More affordable housing, aging in place, that type of thing?
Yeah, those are the common themes that I think you see in most places. So like Chris said, Lewis was recently Sussex County. Actually, if you could go to the next slide, please.
can you make that like the presentation thingy? Or is
Yeah,
that-
that's how it messed up. I'll
Okay,
try.
don't worry about that. I'm sorry, I didn't.
I'll see if it progresses. We'll try.
So in Sussex County, they actually recently adopted an ADU ordinance. And so the top line of this slide, reading through your current code, there's nothing that kind of directly correlates to an ADU. So something such as like a granny flat or in-law suite, carriage homes. In Sussex County, they had what they refer to as a garage studio apartment. And so that language was then kind of taken and tailored into an ADU. In reviewing your code, again, there's nothing that directly correlates, but there are a few things that we wanted to point out. So there is an accessory use and structure in R2 and HR zoning that allows for the renting of one room to non-transient roomers or boarders. There is similar language in all of the zoning districts except for AH, which says accessory uses and structures, clearly incidental and customarily to and associated with a permitted use. And then there are requirements in your current code for accessory buildings. So it says where they can be located, the height being a max of 15 feet, the setbacks. It has a distance of 10 feet from the principal building, as well as all buildings in aggregate cannot occupy more than 30% of the required rear and side yard. So there are some requirements for accessory buildings, which I guess are kind of tied to an ADU.
So
Can you define accessory building?
a building that's clearly incidental and subordinate to the principal structure.
Yeah, if
Like a shed.
Shed, garage. This is not to imply that third bullet down would allow an ADU.
right.
That's just telling us that that's how your ordinance deals with accessory structures.
My understanding, and this is just from somebody in my neighborhood's experience. They had a large garage put on their property. They were not allowed to put water in there because then it could be a livable space. Is that I don't know, I mean,
You know,
is that,
I don't know about the water, I mean, that
I mean,
sounds
it
right.
has electricity and everything else. And they weren't permitted to put a sink in there.
I don't,
I think
That-
it could be
that-
different.
if you.
I'm just, because they said it would then be, I
You
guess,
live
kind of
there.
an ADU, but technically live there.
Yeah, so I think it sometimes depends, so again, going back to that Sussex County example, the garage studio apartment. You could have, a sleeping area, you could have a bathroom, but you could not have cooking facilities. And that was like any kind of cooking, so even a microwave could not have that. Couldn't have a hot plate, you could have, a dishwasher, you could have a fridge. But you could not have any other cooking facilities.
So you have a dishwasher to clean the dishes that you can't use to eat
You
off
can't
on.
make a
Right.
sandwich.
Yeah.
You just can't cook,
So,
you can't have
you know,
grilled cheese.
What people were doing after they got their,
Just
got
putting it in
there.
a microwave.
yeah, yeah. But that's how they define cooking facility. So I think that's along the same lines
Okay.
of, I think for the, like, Lewis example, because they, along with, defining the ADUs, they also have a section on accessory buildings. Now, I'm not sure what their previous, code says, but, so. So except for accessory dwelling units shall not, so this for accessory buildings and structures shall not have the following facilities: cooking facilities, stove, ovens, ranges, microwave, bathing facilities. So that would be, shower tub. You can have one sink with running water and a toilet, and no sleeping facilities. So I guess that's how they're trying to differentiate between the ADU and having an accessory, building. So I think, that probably is, that could be accurate, what you're saying. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So there are, several different considerations, to think about with an ADU. So we broke these into, different slides. Next slide, please. So starting with permitted uses and setbacks. So the permitted uses options are, it can be permitted by right. That is a suggestion by the Delaware Housing Authority. Basically, the Housing Authority is, wants you to remove any restrictions that would prevent an ADU being able to be constructed. So, having it as a by right permitted use would help with that. Another option would be a permitted by a conditional use. The city of Milford recently, earlier this year, adopted ADU regulations, and that's what their process is, that it's a conditional use, which is a few more steps. They require I think it's a public hearing with the planning commission and city council. So that requires a few more steps.
We don't have that tool. We don't have conditional uses. We have special exceptions, which is a board of adjustment issue. So some municipalities have conditional uses, which is planning commission and the legislative body. We don't have that here in the city. So, that would be a big deal to create a conditional use process just for one use. So we would probably substitute special exception in there. But remember, special exceptions are considered to be permitted uses. And they can only be technically legally disapproved by the Board of Adjustment if there's something uniquely negatively impactful about that a proposed use in a particular location. If it's the same impact to the community as any other, as that use anywhere else, they have to approve it.
So some other considerations are, which you need to limit, an ADU to certain zoning districts, again, that's something that is not suggested by the housing authority because that would potentially restrict where the ADU can be. Another thing to think about is how many ADUs per lot. I would say most examples that I've seen, it's one per lot, but you know, if you wanted to allow more than that, that's something to think about. As far as setbacks, considerations would be, would the ADU need to meet the setbacks of the zoning district where it's located? Or would it be a similar setback to what the accessory uses are, which I think was the 5-foot setback from the property line? So that would be from the rear and side property line.
And 10 feet from the principal dwelling
Yes.
residence.
Next slide, please. So types of ADUs, this goes back to the definitions. Some of the definitions included the types of ADUs. So I think this image is pretty helpful to show what types there are. So in that top row of pictures, you have the interior ADU. So that would be a conversion of space. So it could be an attic or a basement that you're converting into an ADU. On the second row, you have an attached ADU. So that could be a conversion of a space such as an attached garage, or maybe you had a screen porch that you're going to enclose, or it could be new construction. And then that bottom option is the detached ADU. And again, that could be conversion or new construction. So conversion could be a detached garage or, you know, one of these accessory buildings that we've been talking about. Next slide. Looking at lot size, that's something, that's an important thing to consider going along with the zoning district. So currently in your code, R1, R2, R3 allows for a minimum lot size of anywhere from 2,000 square feet to 7,500 square feet, and a smaller lot size in the HR and HC districts. And we added this visual just to show some of the lots within HR, HC, and even in R2 are very small and narrow. So that would be something that needs to be kind of looked at and kind of considered looking at average lot size in some of these zoning districts. Next slide, please. So along with lot size would be the size of the ADU. So some considerations would be not putting any kind of limit on the size of the ADU. Often, I would say in the examples that I've seen, they use a percentage. So if it's an ADU within an existing structure, it would be a percentage, say 30 or 40% of the floor area of the single family dwelling. For a detached structure, it could be similar, that you could do either a square or a percentage of the floor area, or you could set a maximum. So whichever one is greater. I think one of the examples from Milford for their accessory cottage, which is the detached, they require a minimum of 220 square feet and cannot exceed 40% of the floor area of the detached dwelling or 1,200 square feet, whichever is greater. So that's an example of how they determine lot size or ADU size.
200 square feet isn't very big.
220 square feet is.
That's
tiny.
that's efficiency.
Yeah, yes,
One of
yeah.
those mini houses.
When you say floor space, are they talking about the total square footage of the house
Mhm.
or just the first floor?
Of the entire single family. Next slide, please. So 2 additional considerations would be parking and utility connections. So parking for residential is typically 2 spaces per unit, unless it's maybe like an apartment complex or something. Sometimes the numbers are a little bit lower. So you would need to think about, do we require an additional parking space? Sometimes it's just 1 additional space, or do you not make that requirement?
But we don't have any parking requirements within, like, I mean, if you're rebuilding a single family home, there's no parking requirements, is there?
Yeah, I think so. Is it,
We don't really get into rebuilding homes here, but if you had
It's like on Second, but I'm not thinking of a subdivision.
You're thinking of Second Street where they just built those houses.
Yeah, I mean, they're right up to the road. Nobody has any driveways. The only parking is on the
Street.
street.
Or at the end.
these must have been lots of record, all the way at the end.
Towards,
Um,
yeah,
To
almost.
the end of the 100 block.
Yeah.
Just before you get to Gold Hill.
Yeah. Yeah, if you were subdividing and creating new lots, you would have to have 2 spaces per dwelling unit. So,
Interesting.
you know, that River Edge concept plan, buried in all of that stuff was the parking schedule. So each duplex, you don't really talk about required parking spaces for new single-family detached lots because the parking's taking place on the lot. So when you're talking, it usually comes into play when you're talking about apartments or townhouses or duplexes where there's no room on the lot necessarily. to
But
park.
there's no room on those lots. I mean, it's street parking, just like the rest of.
Where Second Street,
Uh-huh.
that, they must have been lots of record, I don't
Oh,
ever.
so they weren't changing the cause I'm thinking about where I'm living. It used to be one lot. The builder bought it and has put 4 townhouses on it, and we all have driveways and garages, which would have covered the need for parking spaces. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Is that 2 additional parking spaces per unit? Like, for instance, my driveway holds 4 cars. And that's,
Yeah, so,
plus my garage, so that's 5 cars.
Yeah, so usually garages aren't included in required parking.
I mean,
So-
my driveway would be sufficient, let's just say if I had something, because I have space for 4 vehicles, so it's 2 per unit.
yeah. If we got a townhouse development here tomorrow, it's most likely that a developer would be saying, I would like to count that driveway as 1 parking space. So, but your ordinance, you know, number 1 is single family detached dwelling, 2 spaces per unit. Except infill units in the HC and HR district, which add no more than 2 dwelling units. So, that's, you know, pretty standard stuff. So in the unique situation here where a lot of if you were to consider ADUs in the historic district and they don't have any off-street parking to begin with, all we're saying is that's a consideration. Like, are you gonna allow an ADU where there's no parking spaces on the lot to begin with?
Guess it depends.
Yeah,
Can I ask a silly question? What is the difference between an ADU and, for example, the house on Fifth Street that's for sale, that's been made into apartments? What's the difference?
An ADU is there's still there's still a primary dwelling. That is the dwelling, and then there's an accessory dwelling that is clearly subordinate to the primary dwelling.
But I
Either-
guess I
either-
don't understand, because when you have a unit within the house,
You still have a main owner,
but one is not the primary, so they're all like
and that
Split up.
apartment, they're all-
semi-equally, so there's not a primary,
so
I think. what
is
it
there something in our code that allows a house to be turned into an apartment like that was?
The
And-
renting of 1 room to non-transient roomers or boarders.
But this has separate electric and everything. They're apartments. They're not just 1 room.
Yeah, so
They're all over
that,
the city though.
that,
It's on Fifth Street.
No, but I'm saying there's buildings like that all over the city.
Yeah, they're.
Yeah,
all-
so I'm asking, like, why is that acceptable? Are they grandfathered into something?
It has to be an allowable use of that property.
Yeah.
I think you
So
can,
I don't know,
No.
I'd have to look up
It's for
Zoning.
sale by Scully. I mean,
okay, I'd have to look up the zoning of it to
that's,
see if it's an allowable.
they may have had the lot rezoned.
I don't.
I'm
No,
just
or
asking
the
as,
zoning may allow it. I don't
The
know.
current zoning may allow, is what she's saying. Just depends on what, like, area I guess it's in and what's allowable in that area.
I mean, it's just all houses. They're just all out, it's all housing, it's all
Well, it
residential.
would all be
That's why I was
considered
just wondering.
residential, so an apartment's still considered residential housing.
That's why I'm trying to wrap my mind around how these are different. That's all.
Well,
That's- that-
those are not ADUs. That's a house that's been divided into separate independent living quarters. An ADU is, there's one independent living unit that is clearly subordinate to the primary living unit.
It's still owned by that person.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll get into that.
Oh,
So I have a question. So this presentation, this talk about ADUs, is this to kind of codify things going forward? Because I know, as the Chief was saying, those kind of structures, buildings, units already in existence in the historic district. I can't say outside, but I know within the historic district. Plum Alley, for example. I mean, before we bought our house, which is on the corner of Harmony and Fourth, we was at Plum Alley. And they told us that actually used to be a garage that got converted into this. Now, whether it was a garage or not, I don't know, that's what they said, you know. But, cause this, and it's right behind the big manor house that's right there at the Strand, just across from Bow Hill. And then going down on Harmony Street at the Strand, there's the home that has what clearly used to be stables, carriage stables at one point. What they're used for now, I don't know. But I can see what those could very easily become, something.
apartments or ADUs.
What was that?
I said apartments or ADUs, yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'm just
apartments.
trying to wrap my head around the difference. That's all.
Yeah. so-
Again, if you go back to that,
By subordinate, are you saying it has to be smaller than the original footprint and it has to, so they can't ever be equal size, that type of thing?
yeah,
Yeah.
that was the
The
intent of that previous slide about the
square footage.
Square footage, it's always recognizing that it's smaller subordinate accessory.
Mhm.
Dividing one old house into 4 separate apartment units, that's providing housing, that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, I just tried to like I said, make sure I understand and differentiate the two.
Yeah, and I think, looking back at those images, so if you were converting a space, it would just be, say, an ADU, that was an attic was converted, so that space is gonna be smaller than the entirety of the single family. So that's why it's considered subordinate, same thing if it was a basement that was converted into an ADU. So utility connections, is something to consider, so that would be electric, sewer, and water. Considerations would just need to be, would you be able to, take the service from the existing connection, or would you need a new dedicated electrical meter? I think one of these examples does require a new, sewer connection, you can't take from an existing. And then water, a few places I've seen, you can connect to an existing water, but you still need that emergency shut off valve just in case.
So in these, we would defer to the MSC on what they would want to see for electric and water, and the county on sewer. And these are big issues to public works departments where ADUs are considered. And for fire suppression. And to add to this is addressing, we would need to figure out, when we were in Rock Hall and talking about this, it was a big issue. Emergency service providers wanted to make sure that it had a unique address, or didn't have a unique address. I can't remember what was preferred, but knowing that there is a dwelling behind the dwelling,
Correct.
you need to know. Be there, somehow,
Some type of notification process, yeah.
be its address or something, I'm not sure how.
Makes sense. So getting to the ownership that I think was mentioned a few moments ago. So a big question is, does the property owner or the homeowner need to live on the property? I would say in most examples, yes, they do require the property owners to live in one of the units. So it could be the main dwelling or it could be in the ADU. But they do need to reside in one of the units. Another thing to think about, would the ADU only be for immediate family? Or could it be rented out to whoever? And the last point, could the main dwelling and ADU both be rented? So I guess that kind of goes back to the first question of, does the homeowner or property owner need to be on the property and you know, if not, could both of those units be rented?
Is the. I'm not gonna say, it, never mind.
So you're saying that they could be rented?
Well,
No,
that's something to think
That's
about.
just,
Something to
does this primarily exclude things like Airbnbs with them? Like it has to be like a long-term rental, not short-term rentals? Is that as like a
But this is
stipulation
again-
people put in?
That's-
This is an
That's-
accessory
that's-
dwelling unit, not the whole house.
I understand that, but
that,
there's the
that,
whole issue with.
I know.
So I just wanna say, is that something that they put into the requirements that it has to be long-term rentals if it is rental?
Did you go to the next slide? Which is actually like. Perfect
so
segue.
a lot of, not a lot, but some of the issues regarding ADUs coincide with issues with short-term rentals, ownership. Does the owner have to live on the property? Okay. But
Renting.
yeah, renting. So,
So,
and excuse me, to your question, we don't have any answers. We're just saying these are the types of issues that need to be considered and answered. If you
I'm just
wanna-
wondering,
No.
in the circumstances where they put them in, have they stipulated things like long-term rentals
Yes.
only?
so some do specifically say no short-term rentals, and then in the code, they define what a long-term and short-term rental is. I think some of that is, like we had mentioned, at the beginning of this, some of the reasons for an ADU is to find more housing options, and that's usually for more permanent housing, not necessarily short-term housing. So I think they maybe tend to lean towards long-term. But something, if that is the way that you want to go, you would need to define what that long-term is. So is it the 12 months? Is it 6 months? I think we had mentioned before the tourist homes. So you do have the tourist homes in your current code that kind of falls within the short-term rental, though I don't think the code defines a time period for a short-term rental.
So when we talk about tourist homes, is that just another way of saying like Airbnb, those types of
Yeah.
things?
Vacation rental.
So you have the
Yeah.
definition in here.
Yeah, so I think, I don't have the full definition, I just wrote down some notes, so, of what's in the definition, so it talks about overnight accommodation.
Tourist home is currently defined in your ordinance today as a dwelling in which overnight accommodations in no more than 5 guest rooms are provided or offered for transient guests or compensation. And that's permitted by right in all of your zones, most of your zones. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but it's not even on the agenda, but we're going to be dealing with short-term rentals.
Okay.
Was the period like 29 days or less, I thought I heard? Is there like,
There's no time period.
why did they say, never mind.
There's no time period for tourist homes.
I thought that I heard that in the council meeting, that they.
That might have been a public comment.
Okay, 29 days or less in an owner occupied home, is that a tourist
No.
home? Is it owner?
There's no requirement. That's all.
That's all
public
it says.
comment.
Okay, so there's no requirement that you live in it, I'm just asking,
No, there's not.
so that would kind of, okay, that's it.
Wait, what are you saying? I wanna make sure. I'm
We're
clear what your
we're
question-
conflating tourist homes now with ADUs.
No, because personally, I think that it kind of needs to align with the current code that we have. as well. I know this would be a
The
different,
ADUs, is that what we're
a
talking?
different type of use. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just asked if you had to be owner occupied to be a tourist, that's all.
I wasn't at the meeting, so I was just trying to get clarity on that.
Yeah.
And I'll, if it's okay with you, Margot, I'll talk a little bit about what happened at the council meeting at the end of this presentation.
I don't wanna take away Antonina's, talk, but we're gonna have to be dealing with short-term rentals, so you're concerned about if you move, you know, to the extent that we move forward with ADUs, that it has to align with the current code. The current code may be changing regarding tourist homes and shorts, you know. So, and that's gonna be in your lap as well. Figure out and make a recommendation. Sorry.
So they do sometimes in these ADU ordinances do specify, it cannot, I think in the Lewis example, it said that can't be for commercial use, shall not be sublet, and ADU shall not be used as a short-term rental. So some of them clearly state that, and then again, they define it, I think, as short term is less than 30 days, so that's similar to the 29 days. And that's often a way of defining it. Yeah, 30 consecutive days or less.
But that's there.
That's
No.
their-
That's just an example.
That's
Just an
Yeah.
Just an example of the stipulations you could put on it.
Yeah, your current code does not define short-term or long-term rent. Sounds like it may be in the future. Something else to think about is the permitting process and inspections. So for an ADU, you would need to establish a permit process for the ADUs. Something to think about is there currently administrative capabilities to handle those? I thought an interesting, the bullet point number 3, the third one down. This again was an example from Lewis that I thought was interesting that they had no more than 40 ADU permits to be issued within the first 12 months of the effective date of the ordinance, and then after that first year, then there can be as many applications. I don't know if that was maybe just to kind of work out the kinks of a new ordinance and kind of, you know, figure out the process and, you know, tweak it where it needs to be. But that was some interesting verbiage. Something else to think about would be the potential to waive or reduce permit or impact fees. Again, an example like Lewis, they exempt the gross receipt tax for long-term rentals, whereas this Milford example, it says in here that the ADU will be subject to pay a city building permit fee, water impact fee, sewer impact fee, the Carlisle Enhancement Fund charge, municipal enhancement fund. I mean, they are subject to, I imagine, every single fee that any other residential structure is. And then for instance,
Is that for Lewis, are those impact fees for standalone units, or even if you like put them in your attic or basement?
I think it would be wherever it is. So they have a table for what they consider the affordable rents. So their example is for an efficiency maximum of $1,000, 1 bedroom maximum of 1,200, and 2 bedroom max of 1,400. And it notes in here that that amount shall adjust based on annual consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers.
But I meant these impact fees and all. Is that different? Is that only for a standalone unit where you'd have like new construction versus you'd renovate an attic or something?
It depends on the municipality.
Oh, okay.
You know, I don't know what the MSC does when somebody puts an apartment in a house. And it's legal and everybody knows. In most of the municipalities that I'm in, I'm always water and sewer adjacent. I'm always involved in that, and that would typically be an additional EDU,
Connection.
an additional connection fee, because it's a separate household. using one household's worth of water and sewer, and they should be paying their proportionate share of the water and sewer system.
So the last item that is, I guess, involved with the permitting is inspections. So I'm not sure if there's a current process for converted spaces of what inspections entail, but for something for like new construction, like say it's a new detached or an attached structure, inspections would probably be similar to what you already have. So your basics being footer foundation, framing, electrical, plumbing, final inspection. You guys might have some other inspections layered in there as well, but it would be likely a similar process.
Do you have like annual inspections for rentals built into your system?
I think it's like change of tenant and upon the initial license.
If you change the tenant, you go in and take a look around and make sure that it's still livable and.
Makes the SEC.
So this is just the slide saying that whatever, if this moves, it's additional administrative, cost to the city to keep track of all this.
And then lastly, this goes to, I think, some points that have already been mentioned, and a lot of these are, or all of these are mentioned by the Delaware State Housing Authority as, reasons for an ADU, so increased housing supply, options for affordable housing. There's an increased desire for multi-generational housing, so that could be your recent college graduates who come to live back at home, or possibly your parents who are choosing to live in the both of those options, close to family, but that independent living. And then also they talk about using and being able to tap into existing infrastructure. You're not necessarily building new infrastructure to accommodate the ADUs. So that's kind of the ADU basics.
Yeah, I was not here for the last meeting, meeting of the planning commission. So just for my understanding, what is the timeline? Is there like a proposal that's imminent, or is this just to begin discussion on the topic, or what's like the next step?
I think what Chris mentioned was that there was a presentation, and even prior to the presentation from the Housing Authority was a question about ADUs and if we allow them and if we should consider allowing them. And then that presentation furthered the inquiry. So the goal of this presentation was just to inform you of the options and the considerations.
Okay,
And then,
information.
and then determine if you would like to, as the planning commission has the charge of making recommendations to the zoning code. Do you want to consider amending the code to allow for this specifically?
Thank you. Just one little clarity. Thank you.
So lots of things to think about for an interview, a lot of different components to it, and these are just, I would say, kind of the key components that you see in the ordinances that need to be discussed and considered.
I do have a. Do you have experience where they have put forward this a while back and how it has impacted anything? Like, I mean, I know that these are recent ones that you've dealt with, but something that maybe is a couple of years old, and if it's popular or if it's not being used.
All the towns that I know of are relatively new, like within the past year or so, and we could do a little bit of research.
I'd just like to see how it's impacting. Is it creating the affordable housing? Is it allowing the aging in place? Like, is it doing what you would think it would do?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we can research outside of Delaware too, to see, what's happening in maybe some surrounding states. I mean, this is a nationwide conversation. It's not just a Delaware conversation. So we could maybe look at some other places who have had this in place for maybe a few years. I'm not aware of any.
And we're a small city, and there's a you know, I forget the exact number, but there's a big deficit of housing. And we're not, you know, suggesting that we're gonna make a dent in that here, but it's just for someone, for a city of Newcastle size, this is just like providing another option to your citizens. It's not like
Well,
we're not
yeah,
gonna-
absolutely, and
know.
my whole reason for wanting this is really selfish, I'd like to stay in my house. And maybe my daughter wants to move home, I don't know, we'll see, but she'd obviously want the bigger part of the house.
Well, but I think, because I started skimming some demographics. And there is a significant older population here, and I can see where they might want ADUs. It might be a benefit. I don't, obviously, we can't make a decision or even a recommendation tonight, but I think it's worth thinking
Investigating.
about and talking about and.
Like, I'd like to know if there's any negative impacts, cause all I can see is it would be positive. I can't.
Well, I can see where there's gonna be some cost, but I would also think that if you put an ADU on your property, it's gonna increase your property value and by definition, increase your taxes. So there would be some additional revenue coming that might
Offset it over
offset
time.
it, yeah. I mean, I don't see it creating a huge, and realistically, most of the lots here are really small. So unless people were doing it inside the house, I don't know how you would.
Yeah,
have a
Or
lot
you're
of
in one of the
independent
outer
ones.
developments, yeah.
so probably some of the concerns that this moves forward would be similar to the things that you're hearing about short-term rentals, even though they're just in the
Very
same
different.
family of concerns, not they're coming here for the weekend to party, but you know, how do we know the owner's gonna keep track of the renters in the ADU? If we said it's for members of the immediate family, how are you gonna know that it's members of the immediate family? What happens when the parents pass away? What happens to the ADU then? You're gonna have to let them rent to strangers. It's too crowded where we are already. You know, there's not enough parking on the streets as it is. And now you're talking about allowing another house on an existing lot with all, just those are the types of things that you would.
Can they be restricted to certain zones?
Yes.
They-
Mhm. You can restrict them by lot size. The you know, primary lot has to be a certain size. Like, you couldn't do this in a townhouse development, obviously. So inherent in this is a lot size limitation and whether you institute an explicit lot size requirement or you institute performance standards that implicitly restricted to only larger lots. There's different ways to do it.
But when you say restricted to larger lots, you're only talking about a new construction, not like renovating a basement to be a separate dwelling unit.
Correct, more or less, yes. Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're talking about renovating within the existing footprint, you don't have to worry about lot size. But if you're talking about an ADU attached to an existing structure, then maybe you don't have to worry about lot sizes, but the setbacks that you would have put in place would limit
The
the
size.
ADU from going right up to the property line, which is a function of lot size. So next steps, I don't know. I'll leave that up to you guys. And we should just talk about it now, just to frame your decision about next steps regarding this. Can I talk about it real quick? So city council at their last meeting received a lot of concern regarding existing tourist home. And the planning commission is going to be tasked by the city council to look into short-term rentals or tourist homes or Airbnbs, whatever you want to call it. They're going to be tasked with providing a recommendation to the city council on if and how those types of uses should be regulated in the zoning. So that may be good timing for this, it may be bad timing, I don't know, I'll leave that up to you. The planning commission, this is from your code, the council may from time to time on its own motion, on the motion of the planning commission or petition of the property owner, amend, supplement, change these regulations. So you have the authority to, to make a motion to amend the zoning ordinance. And I guess we've talked about this before, there's a practical application that you have to consider. I would never suggest that we go off, that you guys decide that ADUs are a great thing, and me and Max and Antonina get together and we draft an ordinance, and it shows up on the city council's agenda someday, or one meeting. They need to know that this is happening, and they sort of need to sign off on the effort. Even
Well,
though,
almost
So-
like they need the same presentation.
they need to know that something's coming.
So when you all asked for Chris to do more research on ADUs, Chris communicated that to me and I went to council and informed them. We had a very small discussion about it. And then Chris got the green light to go ahead and proceed. So, or if you would like to proceed with something like this, I think it would be a good idea to make some recommendations to council of how you would like to proceed. And then from there, we can, have a communication to them to express that and then draft the ordinance if you so chose.
So would it be, if we did that, it would be up to us to come up and answer all those questions that are kind of in here, like how do you think it should look? What, defining it, the square footage, blah, 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 like we would come up with the whole,
You would look at the
Shebang,
existing code.
and then it would
Yeah.
go as a recommendation at that point.
Yeah.
But they would know that we're working on it in our meetings and what have you.
So
I'm just curious how.
that makes sense. But I want, like you said, I'd like to see a little more information about how it's playing out in other places. And if you can find some place where it's been around for a while,
Does Newark have ADUs?
I would
I feel
doubt
like
it.
that's
I
very-
don't think they
that's
do.
very money situation. Their demographic.
Yeah, with all those students, gosh, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
but
they have a
there's
whole-
other developments outside of that main area
Yeah.
where I know there's definitely one mother-in-law suite. Now, they may have been grandfathered in, but it's a private home. And I know of, absolutely there is one. My sister used to live down that way. I don't know who owns it now, but that house might be just so old that was grandfathered into something before they made changes. I was just wondering if they.
My guess would be that there would be nothing current, but again, I'm not that familiar. So anyway, so back to,
There's a question.
oh, sorry.
Really quick, so yeah, I agree. I would like to see more information first. The point was brought out, about maybe in certain zones or whatever. I think we should actually see a mapping structure of what it looks like right now to see the feasibility of us even going that far, that deep into it, as far as trying to go through a process of making a plan and recommendations and things like that. Like, we need to know what we're looking at, first, so that we can understand if again, it's feasible, so we can do that. Because obviously there are people with single family homes and they're probably doing this right now. They got their college graduated or newlywed children with the new baby living in the basement or upstairs or whatever that looks like, paying rent to them or something. So we know that we're talking about zones where there are actual homes where you can add an attachment like that, more visible structure. So those are the zones I think we need to be looking into and seeing what that looks like.
For the separate dwelling
Right.
units, okay.
And this plays into my initial question, like with regards to the next steps and next processes. I agree with Mark. So you mentioned that the city council was going to be tasking us with developing some kind of ordinance, some kind of plan, some kind of whatever. If that's the case, when is that gonna be happening? And if so, I agree with Margot and with Tamara, we need more information before, something of that nature.
I would
Our next
on
meeting,
on that other issue, I would suspect that once we get the green light from the city council to investigate the implications of short-term rental agreements, we're probably gonna start with something like this.
So what happened at the council meeting was, of course, as Chris mentioned, there was feedback about it and council decided to pass along the question of what do we need to define in our code regarding short-term rentals? So they developed a list of about 10 to 12 questions and things that need to be addressed. So Chris, Max and I will do some research on this and turn that over to you along with those questions and along with the existing code and have you evaluate it, probably yes, by the next meeting.
so January,
Yeah.
because that's what our next meeting is,
Mhm.
okay.
Is there any chance we could get like this question and answers a little earlier?
Yeah,
It takes me sometimes to read it a few times,
But I'm
look
thinking,
stuff up and then
and I'm
understand
thinking,
it.
we're not gonna be doing this fast. I would rather take our time and think about it.
Why don't
So
we ask
even-
stupid questions, you know, like they have questions?
Well, but if you don't ask stupid questions, then you're always left not sure of the answer.
Well, no, I could, maybe, it could be something I could figure out on my own if I had time,
Okay,
you know, working full-time and part-time at my store and blah, blah, blah. So I just like to have things a little earlier.
okay. Do we have any? David Bree, do you have any other
Thank you very much.
questions,
It's
thoughts?
just been very helpful.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. This is really appreciative. Next. So in 2025, we are due to do the comprehensive plan 5-year review. And so back to Amy and Chris, it's the Amy and Chris show this month. Can you both explain to us what exactly a 5-year review is and is not, just so people are clear that we're not like rewriting the plan at this point? And I think you've had some experience working with other cities, and yeah, so that would be really helpful. What does it really mean and what have other municipalities done?
So I'll start with the law, from Title 22 of the Delaware Code. Municipalities and Chapter 7 Planning Commission. At least every 5 years, a municipality shall review its adopted comprehensive plan, determine if its provisions are still relevant, given changing conditions in the municipality or the surrounding areas. Period. And then it goes up to the next sentence, it's something different. The adopted comprehensive plan shall be revised, updated and amended as necessary and re-adopted at least every 10 years. Provided, however, you can get a request you can get an extension. So you review it every 5 years to make sure it's still meeting your needs. And you update it as necessary or re-adopt the same thing every 10 years. You have to go through the motions every 10 years, even if it's still valid and meeting your needs, you have to re-adopt it. Have to go through the process, have your public hearings. And for the 5-year review, you just do this sort of internal review and you send something to state planning if you think it's still valid, saying, we've done our 5-year review, we still think it meets our needs. If you don't think it meets your needs, then obviously you're getting into a new review process. And I think there's minor and major revisions. So Amy has some experience with what other towns have done during at this juncture.
So we've worked with towns that have done kind of maybe each different version. So, some towns have reviewed their comp plan, so they'll go through it chapter by chapter, or A big focus would be on the goals and strategies, to see if those are still, relevant. They review it, they look at it and say, we're still good. So it's a letter, like Chris said, to Office of State Planning saying we reviewed it, we talked about it over, at these meetings, this was our process, it's still relevant, and that's that. We worked with one town that, felt like their plan was still relevant, but they did feel like there were some, development challenges that they were dealing with, so they wanted to provide a more in-depth letter. So they actually went through all their implementation items to give, I guess, some background on what they had already accomplished, what they were working on. And then we drafted some paragraphs about the development issues that they wanted to highlight. So one of them was climate change. At that time, this was many years ago. So at that time, they were dealing with a lot of this coastal community. So developers coming in, that were buying up properties for income purposes, making them into what the town called McMansions, which were causing lots of noise issues, parking issues, all kinds of things. So they wanted to highlight that. So it was about a 6 to 8 page letter that was sent. And it was just really to notify state planning that these were some issues that they were dealing with. So that was kind of in the category of comp plan is good and still relevant. We'll see you at the 10-year review. We had another town that did review theirs and did decide that they wanted to make some minor amendments. Transportation and congestion issues were an issue in town, still are an issue in town. So they kind of wanted to beef up their transportation chapter, but only a few sections in that chapter. And they also wanted to update their demographics and population projections because they were, I think, off of a census year. So they were using older census data. So that was a comp plan amendment to state planning, which is a relatively easy process. Now you submit everything online. You send them, what the text changes are to the code. State planning reviews it. You have a meeting with state planning, and they review it, and then you guys can adopt those changes.
It still went through the local public hearing process?
I believe, no, I don't think it did. I think it was just reviewed by the circuit rider
Doesn't it have to
No,
go
I
to
mean,
city
at the-
council?
To get,
for the town. I think for a minor change like that, I don't think it did. This was like 2015. So I can check if that was a
it's just
problem.
like,
That, it's possible that it would need to go, but that's kind of a minor. So with that, comp plan amendment, your 10-year timeline does not change. So your timeline for the 10-year is December 2030. So that would stay in place. If you decide that major changes are needed, that basically puts you in a full comp plan rewrite. So going through the entire process, having it reviewed by state planning and all the agencies, the public hearing process, and then it would be recertified. So you would get a new 10-year process. So those are kind of the options. I only know of one town, we did not work with them, who actually at their 5-year decided to do a complete rewrite. And they did it,
that is?
it was Fenwick Island. And they had, I think in between that time from when it was adopted and then to their 5-year, they had a whole new council, a whole new planning commission, kind of everybody was all new. And they decided to do it in-house too. So they wrote it themselves. But that was something that they, felt that they needed to do. I would say that's kind of rare to see someone rewrite the whole thing at the 5-year. It's really typically just a review, like Chris said, to make sure that things are relevant is what the code says, state code says.
When is this due?
December next year.
December of next year.
So in a year. And I would say if we decide that everything's still relevant, we're not gonna need a year, so.
I still want to do in June.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, no, you have until December.
Friday.
Yeah, You have until that time frame. In my experience, like if it did take you guys longer to review it, they're not gonna, hold you as long as you're showing that you're actively reviewing it, you can extend past that.
So you just said some of the minor things they did when they updated, they said they beefed up their traffic information because there were problems, but they also updated their data to show the most latest census information.
Yeah, and I think it
And
was,
that's all minor stuff.
yeah,
Is there anything that we're addressing that is within the comp plan, like short-term rentals?
No,
Okay.
well,
That would be
actually,
an
I don't,
ordinance
I don't know.
code change. I would
You
think.
know, you would, so this is where I get confusing, and I'm trying not to be, so. You don't need to. If you're, I'm not sure if it says anything about short-term rentals or in your content. I didn't go through it recently for this presentation. Let's say that it's silent on everything we just discussed today. You would not have to amend it
Okay.
to do an ordinance for an EDU or short-term rentals. There's enough language in your housing chapter that says, provide affordable housing, make sure that there's enough housing, so. But if your comp plan did say, the city should adopt a short-term rental ordinance. Because during the comp plan process, we heard all of this feedback from citizens about these concerns. And it bubbled up into a very explicit strategy and recommendation in the comp plan. Then you would sort of be expected to do that. But it doesn't need to be in there to do something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're saying that it's broad enough that we don't have to?
It's broad enough that you don't have to amend the comp plan to do a whole host of things. Now, the one thing that there is a direct correlation by state law in that same section of the code is it says the comprehensive plan shall be the basis for the development of zoning regulations as permitted pursuant to chapter 3 of this title. Should a jurisdiction exercise its authority to establish municipal zoning regulations pursuant to chapter 3, it shall, within 18 months of the adoption of a comprehensive development plan or revision thereof, amend its official zoning map to rezone all lands within the municipality in accordance with uses of land provided for in the comp plan. So if you, and I'm just throwing this out as an example. If you thought in your 5-year review that you're just sick of the DG zone, and I just use that because it's an easy correlation between your comp plan and your zoning. Because the DG zone was born from the 2010 comprehensive plan that made a very explicit recommendation to reshape your gateways. And it had a whole section on your gateways. And it said the town should adopt a gateway ordinance that does this and does this, and, in very general terms. And in 2013 and 14, that's when the DG zone was created. And that's the correlation between, and if it didn't say that in the comprehensive plan, and those properties were zoned industrial, well, by stating that in the comprehensive plan, it allowed the city to proactively rezone those areas. So the city can't just go out and proactively rezone areas to whatever it wants. Number one, it has to be in the comprehensive plan. So that the link between the future land use as stipulated in the comp plan, which is generally very general language, and your zoning, there's a direct link between those two by law. But if we wanted to go to DelDOT and say, we want Route 9 to be raised 3 feet, or we want to bypass, which should probably be in your comp plan. But we could we could request a host of transportation improvements that most likely don't need to be in a comp plan. We could do an ADU ordinance, short-term rental ordinance.
So let's just say we love everything in here is great. But we wanna present something, we could say that we investigated affordable housing with all these presentations. And that could just be something to show that we are working within
Yeah, you could
goals
provide a
of,
progress report
goals
on
of here, to say that we've, worked with Delaware State Housing Authority, we've looked at ADUs, we've looked at this, that, and the other. It's just something that we could almost kind of put a check mark
Well, we have the.
and
annual
present in our
report.
letter if
Yeah,
that
so
was.
we usually do that in annual report
Yes.
already,
Yes.
so we sort of historically have it on record for the past couple of years of what we.
It just seems like something, like she
Oh,
said,
To Amy's point, right, you could do a longer letter.
just something that just shows
Mhm.
there's effort, even if we took it the last 4 years worth of letters and kind of summarized them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a particular issue that, was kind of a priority, just so that they know that it's something that you're working on and you have something that's in, a strategy or a goal that says look at for research, affordable housing, that would. fall.
Yeah, that is one of our goals.
So, you could do that, you don't have to, that would be, up to you.
Margot's gonna talk about how she would like to proceed with the mechanics of this, but, just think freely, there's obviously the way Amy described it, there's a host of ways that you could address this, so.
And it's not to say that if you come up with something, we might wanna wait and make the bigger changes in 2030, which it'll be here before we know it, I'm sure. So here's what I have suggested at this point. In looking at the comp plan, you'll notice that there's 15 sections. The appendix I'm eliminating. The first 3 are very general and just explaining. The first one's an introduction, here's what the comp plan is. The second one's the community profile. And then the third one's city and community services. The profile is really based on the 2010 census. And just for our purposes, not to change the plan at all, we'll send you a link of the most recent demographic information about the city, just so we're dealing with current information and not information that's 14 years old at this point. Because it does get updated by the US Census Department, I guess, pretty regularly. From that, so basically then chapters 2 through 14. Yeah.
3 through 14
Yes,
Or 4.
4.
or 4?
So I want everybody to just read the first 3.
Okay,
And then, and I think even the implementation, maybe we all want to read that one as well. And then we're gonna split up the rest of these. One of these is only 2 pages long. The annexation one is only 2 pages long. So whoever takes that, definitely needs to take 2. Does anybody at this point, when you're looking over those chapters, does anybody have a preference, or do you want me to just kind of randomly assign them? And then
So-
what I will tell you is my next step is gonna be like the first, like 4, 5, 6, we'll do like maybe talk about the first 6 chapters in January, and then the next 6 in February, and then finish it up in March. And so what I want you to look at when you're reviewing those chapters is, do we think those provisions are still relevant? And if you think there's something that needs to be changed, what is it? And, does it need to be done now, or can it wait, or can it be done with an ordinance? And if you think it needs to be changed, you need to be able to justify why you think it needs to be changed.
Can I make a request?
Before you make a request, Margot, so you were saying everyone read chapters 1 through 3, 14, and they say read chapter 5 also?
No,
No, she did say
Chapter
chapter 5
five
only 2 pages.
it's only
Okay.
2 pages long.
Okay.
And so then we're gonna split up the chapters and everybody take 1 or 2, but since chapter, that 5 is only 2 pages long, that person's gonna do 2 chapters definitely,
Okay, so 1 through 3 and 14, before
everybody.
we come back in January.
And
Okay,
then your respective chapter, if you're at the top of the list.
Can I request that, housing and transportation be done by everybody? I think that those are gonna be the two
How do
that
you
have,
guys feel about that?
that have the most,
Impact?
discussion and impact. That those 2 things always seem to come up at all our meetings.
Are
I
you
just
guys
think
okay
that
with
those 2 things should be handled by everybody.
Okay,
I have no problem with that, yeah.
I don't have a problem with it either.
I think having everybody's impact and thought and not leaving thought process up to one specific individual to read it and make their recommendation is just better on those 2.
So we're doing housing and transportation for everyone, right?
Beyond that, does anybody have any preference for the remaining chapters?
Can we back up 1 second? I just
Sure.
wanna make sure I'm tracking with you. 1, 2, and 3, we're all gonna read that.
1, 2, and 3, 7, 11, and 14, we're all gonna read.
Mhm.
Can I request we just do this and then the next meeting allocate the other ones? I just feel like if we do that, then we all have a better understanding.
And we're missing 2 people.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
so I
I'm-
mean,
I'm
since
okay with that.
those items are for everybody. And, it's not like, I mean, we can kind of take our time and go through this, so.
Well, we're not gonna meet till January, so we have a little bit extended time this time, so.
So is the idea for all of us to read them? You're saying you're gonna assign them to
Well, not
individuals?
now.
Not now, but is that what you're thinking in the future?
For the other ones, yeah.
So
But
it's
when
not-
we come back in January, what we might all say is, can we all read all of them and do the
Yeah.
same thing again?
I just
So I'll
think it'd
leave
be a
that
more
open.
fruitful discussion if we
All
if we
read.
all read it together and then we could come back. I know you're not putting anything in stone right now, but I just feel like.
Well, I mean, if you guys are okay with that, I just didn't, I was afraid that if I asked everybody to read everything, you'd all like shoot me.
No, we love you.
I
In the
think-
minutes.
I think since we have until next December, that's a good idea. I mean, we have time to do that. Could you just, I know you'll be emailing this information out to everybody because of the 2 missing people. Just go back over, because I didn't write everything down about what you want us to look at in each chapter.
Actually, looking at this, by the fact that we will have read and reviewed 6 chapters by January, that leaves only 8 chapters left. So the idea of us all reading and discussing is actually very feasible. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I will summarize in an email what everybody's to say.
To read and to what we're to get out of it and what we should bring as far as thoughts to the next meeting.
Okay. Any other thoughts, feedback? We all good? We don't have a hack persons, so Stephen, are you on hack?
No, I'm not.
Okay, then we don't have a hack report. And I didn't think to ask Cynthia if she had one to forward, and she didn't. Actually said anything about it, she said she's gonna be here. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to give you an update, just to close the loop, from our last council meeting. At your last meeting, I believe, you did make the recommendation for council to approve the ordinance regarding a moratorium on structures. I think it was over 15 units. Council did have a very lengthy discussion. I will encourage you to review the meeting and the minutes once they're approved, which will be after the December meeting. Because it's just too much for me to reiterate everyone's point of view. But ultimately, they voted 4-1 to not approve the moratorium. So although you did recommend it, council did have a lengthy discussion and did not approve it. So there's no moratorium on the table at this time. And then the second item was that conversation about short-term rentals that will be coming to you for the next meeting.
Is there a possibility the moratorium will come back up?
I don't know. That would be up to whoever is interested in that, if they are, I don't know.
They
But
could be able to develop a sense of that if you watch. the
Yeah.
video. Yeah,
The sense, well, never mind, that's a personal opinion, Just keep that to myself.
yeah, definitely watch the video.
Oh, I did, I heard it, I didn't watch it, I heard it. When ordinances are made, are they not reviewed and discussed how they plan to carry things out? Serious.
So it
So it seems
depends.
like if we wanted to put forward an ordinance on ADUs, we would need to come up with a plan of how the city is to implement it and guidelines. Is that not what council does too?
It depends on the ordinance. But just like you want to avoid FOIA violations, so does councils, so they're limited to how much they talk about certain things, and when they introduce an ordinance, they typically just introduce it and then wait until the public hearing and the second reading to have a conversation in depth.
Anything else? You guys ready to leave? Yep. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Or you have motion during?
David, a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned. Have a nice holiday, guys. See you in January.
Same.